Strategies, tips, and trends from pre-med, medical school, and residency admissions experts. This is the Med Edits podcast. And here's your host, Dr. Jessica Friedman.
My name is Dr. Jessica Friedman, and I am the chair and founder of Med Edits Medical Admissions. And today we are going to be talking about how applicants can get more medical school interviews. And this is certainly a question that we get from our students as well as from many other students who are sort of searching the web to find out how they can possibly get more interviews. And the good news is that there are many things or several things that you can do to try to earn more medical school interviews during the application season itself. Now, I encourage applicants to always think about the medical school admissions process as a fluid process. Now, assuming you are not accepted to your top choice medical school right off the bat, it is really important to provide medical schools with more evidence that you are an excellent candidate. Now, what can you do to try to get more medical school interviews and to convince a medical school that you are a great candidate whom they should offer an interview to? And some of these approaches we find have better results than others, okay? The first thing you can do is you can send a medical school update letter, which should also should serve as a letter of interest, and we will talk more about that. You can send in, or you can have additional letters of reference sent in to your medical schools, and you can also recruit something that we call a medical school applicant advocate, and we find that that third option of recruiting an advocate is actually the most effective way to get more medical school interviews during the application season. So let's first talk about medical school update letters and letters of interest. So update letters and letters of interest always come together. So you never want to write to a medical school about anything that you have done without expressing your interest in some capacity in that medical school. Okay, so updating medical schools about recent accomplishments, whether that is, writing to them about what your first semester grades are, or any recent developments that might be impressive. Maybe you're working in a lab, maybe you are volunteering somewhere and you've had some really interesting observations. All of this can potentially influence a medical school's decision. Okay. Now, if you are writing an update letter to tell the medical schools about your recent accomplishments, in that letter, you also want to express your specific interest in the medical school. Now, since you have not yet visited the medical school, your knowledge of that medical school is going to be limited to what you can find on the internet, but thankfully, you can actually find a lot of useful information on the internet about any given medical school. So maybe you want to include in your update letter / letter of interest information about what you appreciate about the medical school's curriculum. Maybe you want to write something about the clinical sites or the clinical departments that really interest you. Maybe there are some researchers who are doing research in your area of interest, or maybe there are some extracurricular activities that really appeal to you. When including information about what interests you about the medical school, it's always good to try to highlight those things that also sort of are reflected in your own interests. So for example, let's say you've done a lot of really amazing orthopedics research. Maybe you want to identify why the orthopedics department at that school, would really be a great fit for you, and how maybe you could continue to contribute to orthopedics research because there's somebody there doing research that relates to a topic that really interests you. Now, in our experience, update letters and letters of interest don't usually have great influence in earning medical school applicants more interviews, but they're still good to send because then when you do get an interview, it kind of shows how interested you are in that medical school, and certainly that can help you. Now, the second thing that you can do to try to get more medical school interviews is to send in additional letters of reference. Now, these additional letters of reference should not be from individuals who have already sent in letters of reference. You want to send in new letters of reference. So if you're in school, that's usually an easy place to get additional letters of reference from, new professors, new classes that you're taking. If you're doing research and your principal investigator has not yet sent in a letter of reference, that's a great person to ask. So really think about, okay, have I met anybody new since I submitted my application in June who would be willing to, endorse my candidacy? And, and think about that. And if you can think of somebody, certainly sending in additional letters of reference that sort of further say how fabulous and wonderful and what a great medical student you're going to be, that can help your candidacy. Now, at the top of sort of our priority list of, in terms of things that we encourage our students to do to try to get more medical school interviews is to recruit an advocate. And so what is an advocate? An advocate is somebody who is going to call medical school admissions offices, and they are going to say, look, Sarah has applied to your medical school. She is a student of mine. I think she's fabulous. I think she's going to be a great medical student, and I think she's going to be a fabulous future physician. And she hasn't gotten an interview yet from you, and I know that she's really interested in your school. And not only do I want the best for her because I believe in her, but I also think that you're really missing out on a great medical school applicant. So I just want to do everything that I can to try to get her an interview at your school, okay? So we find that these types of advocacy phone calls are actually the most influential in terms of getting applicants additional medical school interviews. Now, there are some smaller undergraduate colleges who make these types of advocacy phone calls on a regular basis, and it's really part of their pre-med routine to sit down with all of their medical school applicants and say, okay, are there any schools you're really interested in where you don't have interviews yet? And to then call those medical schools to try to, get their applicants, more interviews or interviews at the schools in which they're particularly interested. So, and keep in mind that not everybody is necessarily comfortable making these types of phone calls. If someone sort of isn't fluent in the language of academic medicine and academic politics, they may not necessarily be comfortable, making these phone calls. But, we feel that it's still worth asking for, for advocates to do this, because we think and we know based on the results our students have had that this really becomes the most effective way to try to get more medical school interviews. Now, when should you start worrying about not having any medical school interviews? And this is a difficult conversation, but a conversation that we have a lot every year with students who contact us. So our general rule is that if you don't have any medical school interviews after the new year, it's time to reevaluate. It's time to sit down and say, okay, what could I do better or differently, or how do I need to improve my candidacy or my application for next year to ensure that I get more medical school interviews? And certainly there are some students that we sit down with in January and we do that evaluation, and then a week after that happens, they get an interview and they get accepted. So certainly there are exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, for students who have no interviews come January, that's when we start to get a little bit concerned, and that's when we like to, have meetings with our students to find out, okay, what can be done differently. And it might be something, just as, simple like, oh, you need to broaden your school list. We certainly have worked with students who have come to us who have great experiences and great numbers, but just the way they presented themselves on paper was really ineffective. And then we make a lot of suggestions on how to improve that, and then the next year they get, have very different results and much better results. But in the fall, in the sort of mid to late fall / early winter, certainly sending letters of interest and update letters, sending in additional letters of reference, and recruiting those advocates to call admissions offices can definitely get students additional medical school interviews. And, in the fall and, even into the very early winter, there are still many medical school interviews that have yet to be extended. So, certainly there is definitely a lot you can do, during those months to, get additional medical school interviews. But kind of, it's really important to be patient. The medical school admissions process is long. And it's also important to realize that this is in your control, that there's a lot that you can do to try to influence the process, and to realize that you should always be improving your candidacy, because many people are not successful the first time they apply to medical school and they have to apply again. There is really very little stigma to being a reapplicant in the medical school admissions process. And so it's vital that during your application year that you're doing everything possible to improve your candidacy in the event that you have to reapply the following year. So we always welcome questions from our audiences and from our students, so always feel free to email us at info@mededits.com. Visit our website at www.mededits.com, follow our YouTube channel, and also subscribe to this podcast, because we do plan on doing many more podcasts in the future. So thank you so much for listening, and good luck.
You've been listening to the Med Edits podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more pre-med, medical school, and residency admission strategies that will help you obtain the career of your dreams. Be sure to rate and review this podcast so we can continue to provide more admissions guidance.